Okay, I think we're live. Time for me to see if I can find a link to send people. Streaming game dev, doing mission stuff. Underwater mission stuff. Do spow. I've got a tiny bit of a headache. Don't know why, but hopefully that won't get in our way. Let's go ahead and make sure I've got the correct thing. Make sure my audio is working. Yeah, okay. So, last couple of weeks we've been working on the mission system, and we're going to continue to do so. So the way that the mission system works is there's no requirement that the mission nodules, the yellow is the mission system. There's no requirement that the mission nodules be, sub-objects of the mission object. And what that means is that we can have mission objects free-floating in space. That's not what I want. And what that's going to be is it's going to be useful for us to treat some permanent objects as multiple mission objects. And I started streaming, and exactly the moment I did, someone started slamming the mailboxes at the front door. They don't work, and so the mailman constantly kung fu kicks them. This, for example, is a permanent object in the game world. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to have these mission objects be separate from the actual object. Right now, the object itself is, I believe, come on. Yeah, so it's actually tied to this mission, but it's easy enough for us to drag this object out and make it a room object instead of a mission object. And what that'll mean is I can use it as several different mission objects, depending on, for example, whether the base is powered or not. Now, classically, the way you do that is you'd have a conditional mission object where it checks, and if such and such is powered, then do this, and if such and such is unpowered, then do that. I think it makes more sense in our case for it to be linked to different missions based on its object. So if we take a look, here it is. So this highlightable object is bound to this mission objective and this mission scene and this so on and so forth. It makes sense for us to take this whole setup and make it an objective that references the mission object, this one, but isn't actually part of it. And we can do that simply by dragging this into room 1 or wherever we want it to be. It doesn't have to be in room 1. And you can see that that continues to be separate now. Now, one of the things is that this objective that we just tweaked, was it this one? Yeah. So this objective, I don't know why there's like an invisible cube here. That's what was confusing me. We're just going to delete that. We're going to go ahead and rename this so that it has the same name, just so that we can track it down a little bit easier. But the basic idea here is that this is not actually bound to it, but it does have a position. And you can see that if I move this, it moves the position. So what we need to do is make sure that the mission objective actually ties to the object it's pointing to and not necessarily to its own personal position, because its own position might just be some random place. It doesn't actually matter. My fingers are icy cold. Grab myself a half glove here. Now I look properly posh. All right, so this is what we currently have, and the way that we track these mission objectives down is here in the mission, in the on-draw gizmos. We go through the mysteries, so we need to find the mysteries. Maybe that's why I'm confused all the time, because it's mission, mystery, and then mission objective. It should be mystery objective if it's like that, right? I should really change the word mystery and then change the word mission objective. Let me think. So what's a good sub-element of a mission? I guess an objective is, but let me go ahead and thesaurus it. Thesaurus objective. Desideratum. Yeah, that's definitely going to be easy to remember. None of these make... it's not talking about an objective as like an element of a plan, like a checkbox. Noun? Why isn't that's strange? Thinks that noun is a similar thing to objective. Maybe it thinks object. That's probably just binding to object at this point. Well, I could go ahead and replace it with just arbitrary guesswork. Let me make sure I don't have any songs in the background. Yeah, okay. I had some music playing earlier, and I'm never 100% sure that I hit stop. Anyway, first let's go ahead and fix this part. So the onDraw gizmos, you can see how it draws objectives A transform position. We're going to delete that transform. And then over here in mission objectives, we're going to put in a, thank you, we're going to put in a public vector3 position with a getter and a setter. But in order for us to do that, we're going to need to have a public transform real world target. And here we say, if real world target, then return, I guess we can say real world target question mark. This didn't used to be available in Unity's version of C#, but it is now. So if it exists, we'll return real world target dot position. Otherwise, we'll return our transform dot position, like so. Is it not? Does it have to be this? Why is this not working? Is it an or? No. This should work. Okay, so for some reason it's not working. I don't remember. I probably just have it wrong. I probably just remembered it wrong. But that question mark should be a ternary operator. Oh, I'm just an idiot. There we are. I forgot to say that it was returning that value, so it was just kind of hovering there and not doing anything. So that way we can point to a real-world target if we want one. And that's going to be a valuable purpose. So let's go ahead and start renaming some stuff, because this stuff is all tied up. So we're going to go ahead and over here in mystery, let's make sure we're in a namespace. Yeah, we're in the missions namespace, which is good. We're going to want to just refactor mystery into maybe I will just take objective. But it's not. It's like a whole scenario. Should I call it a scenario? But I've also got a scene. This really shouldn't be this hard. I'm just not very bright today. Mission planning. Let's go ahead and see if there's... No, this is like military shit. I don't really care about this. Segment? Subsection? Section? Section might be okay. Chapter. Let's call it a chapter. We can always change it again later, I suppose, because Unity has been pretty good about, or the newest version of Unity combined with this IDE has been pretty good about letting us refactor stuff without desyncing it from the universe. So we're going to go ahead and rename this from mystery to chapter. I don't know why it's chapter mystery. Let's just call it chapter. There we are. So that's good. And we'll rename this to, oh good, it renamed the file too. We'll rename this to chapter event. There we are. So with that in mind, we should be able to go over here into mission objective. We could keep it called mission objective, but that implies that it's one step higher up than it actually is, because it's not actually a mission objective, it's a chapter objective. So we're actually just going to call it an objective, because it's within the mission's namespace. So there we are. And then of course this is going to be called an objective event. And hopefully that'll clear up some of my recurring confusion. If I'm having confusion about my own code, that means there's something wrong with it. And a lot of the times that's just that I named it dumb. And so the names aren't really keeping up with what I'm trying to accomplish. The only other thing is this over here, mission scene element. We're going to name it scene element. And that should do. I think that's everything. So let's go ahead and take a look over here in Unity. And it should clear these up in a second here. Yeah. So the only issue is we've got some unreachable code. Yeah, so this is actually on purpose. I wasn't sure if I'd need that stuff. We'll go ahead and just put a comment here so it doesn't think that I'm trying to use that code. There we go. So I think that's everything we needed. The only other thing left to do is to actually start to build it out. So the way that this works is I can send this newfound objective a real world target, which is below onComplete, which is dumb. So we're going to move it to above onComplete, just so that it doesn't look stupid. There we are. Grind, grind, grind. There we are. And then we can drop our sci-A into it, and that's going to allow us to have that actually be easy to find, because I can just click on it and all that jazz. The only problem is it's separated from the highlightable object, bounds, which is something that's going to bite us later. We're going to have a problem later on when we forget to fill in the bounds. So what we can do is we can try and have that auto-populate. So we're going to pop up the highlightable object here, and we don't have an auto-populate. Let's go ahead and create one, public void auto-populate collider. That's going to be a menu item. Auto collider. And what we're going to do is we're going to find our object, which is the objective here. So objective O equals get component objective. And you can see how it is red, and that's because this is not actually in the same namespace. So we're going to have to say using mission, or we could just put it in the same namespace. Either one of those things works. For now, we will just do it like this, and we'll say if O, then we're going to want to have a piece of text, not a piece of text, have a bounds here. So we need to find the bounds, which is going to be a collider. So collider target equals O.getComponent collider. And if there's not a target, then we do it again. Get component in children collider. And then here we say return or collider equals target. No, that's not how you say it. Did I call it bounds? It's not technically bounds, so let's go ahead and rename that, because bounds is a reserved word that actually has a meaning, and we don't want to use it at the wrong time. So if we take a look for our bounds here, we're going to go ahead and call this a bounding collider or something similar. Refactor, rename. Bounding collider. Yeah, we'll call it that. And that might sound longer and less useful, but in this case it is pretty useful because it is very different from actually giving it a bounds. Bounds is a type of struct with a very specific setup. All right, so that should allow us to use that to just quickly grab this if we forget about it and we don't want to worry about it. just to test it. It's not working. Is not static and cannot be used for menu commands. Is it context menu? I can never remember which of the 10,000 identical words are used in this case. If it's a static object, then if it's asking for a static object, then that implies that it's like popping up here somewhere, which is not where we want it. We want it to be here. There it is. See? So if we take a look, the autocollider is this capsule. We're going to want to see and make sure that it comes up as that capsule again. And you can see that in this case, it didn't come up as anything. It came up as a big fat blank. So let's go ahead and add in some debugging. The capsule collider, it should be a type of collider. There's nothing mysterious about it. Searching Sci-A. It worked fine. So then we can go ahead and just keep debugging until we figure it out. If I got this set up right, I could just pause it and take a look, but I don't have it set up to break right now. I'm really lazy about that for some reason. Found, and then we'll give it target. And then in here, we're going to go ahead and say, there, and just take a look from B at what it has to say for itself. Unity is doing that thing where it won't come to the surface if it's recompiling, but I won't recompile until I bring it to the surface, foreground that is. So it's really being obnoxious at the moment. I don't really know why these things change. So here you can see that it says it found B period, 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 meaning that target isn't null, because it would have said null again. But instead, it's unnamed. It's not an object. What is it? There's nothing named blank. It says specifically that it didn't find anything when I tried to assign it here. Debug.log, checking from o.getComponents in children collider. Thank you for helping. Dot count. We're going to see how many colliders it can find. It should only be able to find the capsule first, and then the other ones can kind of come in at the end. Checking from 0. So it found 0 colliders. Despite that, it's not saying that it found another null value. I guess that's because getComponent in children doesn't return a null? Why would getComponent in children not return a null? That's weird. But what's weirder is that it's not finding the children. It's not finding the colliders. If we take a look at the capsule here, it's very clearly got a collider on it. There's no like magic name for colliders that should miss this. I'm very curious as to what's going on here. You can see that it's searching as Sci-A, but is it searching the correct Sci-A? Because I named this Sci-A as well. I'm going to call this Sci-A-O, just to see whether or not I did something that dumb, because it's entirely possible. Yeah, I did. So the problem is that it's searching itself. So I forgot to actually say that we are searching for a target. It's actually if o.realWorldTarget. There we are. And then here I say this crap. Yeah, that should fix it. That doesn't explain why it was giving me an empty string for a null. That shouldn't happen. That's very weird. I can only assume that the find something in children function does something a little strange. My mouth does something a little strange. I just lost all capacity for thinking. Now you can see. Now if I put the cinder block above the capsule, it'll find the cinder block instead, which would be just one of these little teeny things. And obviously that wouldn't be ideal, but it should still be a help in making sure this stuff doesn't suck too badly. So that is enough for us to set it up, and all I really have to do is add in that same thing here in the intro. And basically what we want to do is we want to make sure that the intro objectives contain this objective but don't highlight it, and that's something a little bit difficult. We have this use dialogue on objective function that we're going to be relying on very heavily. Despite that, it might be, we'll have to test it and see whether or not it works. So we're going to copy this and then paste it here in the intro like that. And we're going to go ahead and drop that into objectives. And then down here, we're going to go ahead and name this something. That's a little bit different. So you can see that we've got this speak obj1 found. We're going to just replace that with this seems unpowered. A nice sensor rig with onboard hard drive. It seems unpowered. There we go. That should do it. And I believe that's going to be enough to make it work. Let's go ahead and find out. Pop. Ooh, it's been a while since I hit play, and it's got to do some recompiling. Obviously, in the real game, we'll do some loading crap that will minimize that long stagger. But we're not ready for that yet. So in this time, it should say something like, "You're an idiot." It said object1 found. Interesting. So what that means is that it's still triggering this guy. Now my guess is that it's still triggering this guy because I don't have any set up way to turn this guy off. So this here is triggering. The highlightable objects, there's a little bit of a mess. So there's some question here. Do I want the highlightable object to be on the world object so that it will always glow when you get close to it? Or do I want it to be part of the mission objectives? If I want it to be part of the mission objectives, then it has to know that the mission objective controls whether or not it is on or off. Right now it doesn't understand that, so it's always counting itself as on. So when we go and we click on it, we're actually completing a completely different mission that's not actually active, or a completely different chapter that's not actually active. If we were to just turn this off and go over there, we're going to go ahead and see that it's going to say, sensors seems unpowered. But we obviously can't do that manually all the time. We're going to need to have some kind of setup where it understands whether or not it should be active. No, it still says objective 1 found. That's interesting. What's going on? Oh, no, that shouldn't be. This is not behaving as I expected it to, but I thought I understood why, and I don't. Okay, so it's definitely still triggering, even though I've turned off the highlightable object. It shouldn't be possible for this to highlight if it's turned off. Is it turning itself back on? No. Is this one pointing to the wrong thing? No. No? Let's do a double check here, see what's going on. I've just turned off the intro version, so we should see Objective X, but we shouldn't be able to see it because the highlightable object is disabled. It's off. It shouldn't exist. I shouldn't be able to highlight it at all. And there might be something wrong with how I set up these highlightable objects. So, interesting. So it's triggering the objective even though it's not highlighting. That is interesting. There's nothing on this that should trigger any logic on the mission. So that means that the highlightable object doesn't actually limit you from interacting with it. You instead are allowed to interact with it regardless. So here in update, this is what we turned off, but apparently we didn't turn off interact. So the question is, how is this getting the interaction target? And as it turns out, we've got an interaction target setup. We've got an object named interaction target. So let's go ahead and grab that and see what the heck's up. I think it's on the chest. There it is. So here's our grabber. Is that what we're using? I think it is. Yeah. So here we use this highlightable object get closest command, right? If we go over into the highlightable object get closest command, which is up here, it's a static, and it checks anything that is here in live. And live is added upon awake. So live, so this must be getting called, but it's disabled. Does awake get called on disabled objects? I was under the impression that if it was disabled, awake didn't get called. But if that's wrong, then I think we need to redo this. I think we need to completely gut this particular part of our functionality. David Goder stopped in to say, how am I doing? I don't know when he stopped in to say that. I've been distracted by this problem. You can see that we've got 3 objects that are awaking. We should have only had 1. So that means that this is the problem. We're going to go ahead and completely redo how we're doing the highlightable object setup because it's clear that that is not going to work for our long-term health. So the highlightable object system was created just kind of offhand. I didn't bother to try and do anything with it that was, intelligent, because at the time I was just trying to get the shader to work. So the highlightable object's main role is simply to move a shader value slightly. The fact that I'm using it to power whether or not you can click on an object is really not very suitable. So we're going to go ahead and create an interactable target. So let's go ahead and do that here. Create a new C# script. Interactable target. This interactable target is going to be a base class, so we're going to have a couple of descendants depending on the kind of response we want. So public, static. So one of the core problems here is that it turns out that awake gets called whether you're active or not. That's going to be something we have to change. So here we're going to use start instead because start does not get called if you're disabled. The problem is this may cause some conflicts if we have other things in start that are looking for these, but I don't think that's ever going to be the case. Live.add this. If live contains this, then live.remove this. There. That's pretty easy, right? And basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to get the same responses as highlightable objects here. And that means we're going to have this same get closest. And that's going to be interactable targets instead of highlightable objects. And you can see this available shit. We're not going to do that. If it's in the live list, it's available. The only other thing we've got is we don't have a bounding collider for this, so we're going to go ahead and steal the bounding collider as well. And as you can tell, highlightable object is going to end up as a just a subtype. So the bounding collider is not going to be required. We're going to go ahead and say if bounding collider we just say p equals h dot transform dot position. There we are. So that should work. Vector 3p. If we've got a bounding collider, we find a bounding collider. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, right? So basically, we just do a couple of passes, a very simple pass where we make sure that it's vaguely within distance, and if it's not, then we just skip it. So let's go ahead and move this to the top here. And move this here. There we go. Yeah, that should work. So then what we do is we allow ourselves to descend from that to create this kind of highlightable object. Highlightable object is not what we're going to call it. To be honest, I'm not even sure whether we should descend from it or have a separate response system. Like, I guess it's something we should descend from, but we should have some virtuals. And the thing about this is the logic of what a highlight means and when a highlight stops meaning something is very freeform. Because several things could be highlighted at once in different ways. For example, you might have this. The idea here is that the player will be clicking on something, but the NPC might also go click on something. But in this case, I think that we're going to want to try and track a specific highlightable target. I think we're going to want to have a static target. So can I have, I think I have to have a private static. I can't have a protected static. Private static, interactable target. Current selection. And then we have a public static interactable target current selection with a getter and a setter, and you can see how it does this very, very basic getter and setter stuff. The get is fine. The set is a little bit more complicated than that. We need to go ahead and if value equals current selection, then return. If there is a current selection, then we want to deselect it. Then we say current selection equals value, and then we say if there's a current selection, highlight it. No, not dehighlight, just highlight. There. And that should allow us to set an interaction target without having to manually track which ones are highlighted or dehighlighted. So down here in public, we're not going to make these public. We're going to make these protected. That way we won't accidentally call them, but we will create a public virtual, no, just make a public void because we don't want to make it change. Public void select as target. Do we want to do it like this? Sorry, I'm thinking about how I want this to unroll, and I didn't plan out how I want it to unroll, so it's a little annoying. We're going to go ahead and put just underscores here. And I don't think this is the approved way to do it, but for me, an underscore is an internal local function or a selection that is never accessed. Obviously, the public versus protected versus private has that same functionality, but I find that when I'm looking at it, I want to be able to tell by just the name whether it's public or private, public or protected in this case. So in this case, the public one is just going to call the class interactable target, and then it's going to set current selection. Why is that capitalized? It is capitalized. That's strange. And, I've had a couple of people tell me that they don't like how I highlight stuff or how I capitalize stuff, but whatever. A lot of people like to have all of their variables with a capital letter. I just lead with a capital letter when I'm doing functions and classes, and I use a lowercase letter for variables, fields, function. But that's just personal preference. It doesn't have any effect on your code, and I think it's mostly just due to when you learned coding and what places you've been to do your coding. Now that should be all we need to do to create the interactable target. Here in the over here in the highlightable object, we're going to want to rename this highlightable target. Boom, highlightable target. And that's going to be easy enough. The only thing is we're going to want to descend from interactable target instead of just an arbitrary empty setup. We don't need this. We don't need this. Don't need this. Don't need this. This uninteracted toggle state untoggled. I think that these probably need to be put into the interactable target, but I'm not sure that I like them. So I'm not sure they'll stay there. So here you can see if highlight, we're going to replace that because we're not actually going to have this. We are going to be using if we are the selected target. What did I call it? Currently selected target, current selection. There it is. There we go. And here we've got interact and set interactable and that stuff. We're going to go ahead and grab those and move them over into our interactable target. There we go. Set interactable is not something that we're going to want to use anymore. We do want to be able to turn these off. We want to be able to make it so they can't be selected or called anymore. But I think that we can just disable them. Can I make this disable instead of on destroy? I can't remember. Yeah, I think that that's... There we go. So that should work. The only question is how this interacts with start. So I guess we'll do the exact same check. I don't want it to add in twice. So here in highlight and all that jazz, the only thing we're going to want to have is a public void disable. The reason we want that is because we want to be able to use a Unity event to call this, and there's no Unity event for calling to turn off a specific object on a transform. So we could turn off the object itself, but I don't believe we can. Let's take a look. I don't believe that we can turn off like the chapter. Oh, you can. Okay, well in that case we don't need it, so let's go ahead and not bother. We'll just disable it. David Goder says he thinks that's the way to go, but I'm afraid that I need to move my chat to the right-hand side so that I can see it. It doesn't seem to want to go to the right-hand side. It seems to want to float scarily on the top. Sorry, I'm moving stuff around on the other screen because I keep forgetting to pay attention to chat, which is obviously not my intention. Come on. See, Twitch is really trying to make this drag and drop interface the work well, but the problem is that it's really kind of shifty, and I can't delete any of these tabs. Like, why do I need a quick action? I don't. The only thing I need is the chat and the stream preview to make sure I'm still online. All right, so what was I up to? Oh yeah, so that should work. The only problem here is that grabber and those sorts of things might be a little bit damaged. You can see how this requires an interactable target and that sort of stuff. Grabber is what detects whether or not we are grabbing something, and we're just going to change it because we don't need to do it anymore in that way. Instead, we're going to have obviously an interactable target. We get the closest target, and all we have to do is set it. So we're going to go ahead and say interactable target.current selection equals this. And we've already set it up so that all of this crap happens automatically. Boom. See? And then here what we can say is that target equals current selection. The only problem with this is that the NPCs will have to have a different way to do this because it's going to fight with the player. So if I want the NPCs to grab something, then I'll have to do it using another mean. And now we've got something called a hand targeter that's barfing. The hand targeters are currently offline. I don't think there are any, but let's go over and fix them anyway. Hello? There it is. So in this case, you can see that this is a highlightable target when it should be an interactable target. No problems. The only issue here is that there might be another highlightable target floating around. I don't think so. I think that's it. Shiblam. No errors. Hooray. So that's good. I think that that's all we needed to do to make it work, but unfortunately we've badly damaged some of our setups. So we need to reselect them and redo them. So if we look at this SciAO, let's disable this one. Let's leave them both. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave them both disabled, and we should get one of those getting highlighted, yeah. So one of them should have popped up, but it looks like none of them did because I probably took just the query out of it. Because there is one over here, this one, that should pop up and be online because I'm not disabling that one. But the question is whether or not I can get these to do what I want them to do. So what we're going to do is we never set up something where the highlightable targets get turned on or turned off. So what we actually need to do is take this setup, and we need to have the mission understand when to turn on all of those highlightable targets. So for that, what we're going to do is here in Start, we're going to go through all of these mysteries, and we're going to set each of these mysteries up to have the targets set properly. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and say m.initialize targets, and then we're going to go ahead and give it a bool, which is going to be whether or not m is the first one. Not the best way to do it, but that's how we're going to do it for now. And obviously we don't have an initialize targets set up, so we're going to go ahead and go over into that. Also, we're going to rename mysteries because now it's chapters. Where were we going? We were going over into the chapters. There it is. We're going to initialize targets. Let's move this to above on draw gizmos. I like on draw gizmos to be the last one, but obviously you should use code regions when your stuff gets complex. This really isn't that complex yet. I'm not too worried. So all we do is we just search for all of our targets. So interactable target array. So David Gooder says, is it a good idea to use a simple lock to get this system working between the player and the NPC? So I'm not sure. The NPC actively doing stuff is quite rare, and usually it's basically a cutscene. So I'm thinking that what I'll probably do is I'll just have like a cutscene system for the NPC. I could turn the player off during that time, and I might, but there's not really any big reason for me to have the NPC actively seek out things to interact with. It's mostly going to be the player interacting with things outside of programmed scenes. So the NPC won't highlight anything. They'll just get a script that says, go here, play this animation, and then mark this as done. So the only question is whether or not we want to do this as get components in children. I think we probably do, because the interaction targets are going to be initialized as inside. So that should do. And then all we do is do a for each interactable target, t and targets, t.enabled equals alive. That's it. The only other thing we have to do is over here in the mission, when the chapters change, we need to make sure to do this same thing again. So what we're going to do is take a look at where we're happening here. Chapters.remove chapter. So if this happens, then do that. Else, we're going to want to tell the new chapter 0. There it is, to turn on. There we go. Now, in theory, this should solve all of our problems. Let's go ahead and turn on both of the things that we need to moderate and make sure that only the one on the intro actually turns on and the rest of them don't. So they're both currently on. We're going to now check and see whether or not it works. We should see this turn off. Hey, look at that, it turned off. And that means that it shouldn't actually even be part of the list anymore because we have an on disable that removes it from the list. There shouldn't be any conflict between the pieces that we're using. I got lost. Sorry, I was busy talking to myself and I lost track of where I was headed. Ooh, I suddenly got really hungry. Oh, that material needs some work. So it says here you can see now highlighting SciAO, which is the correct name. A nice sensor rig with onboard hard drive. It seems unpowered. Perfect. Let's go ahead and head back to our buddies over here for the main plot arc. We'll test that, and then we'll go back and see whether or not it properly says objective X found. So first we're going to get a little bit of a dialogue sequence. And then we're going to be able to just go over here, trigger this. The slowdown when we have a dialogue sequence is really strange. There shouldn't be a significant slowdown there. So now we've turned that on. And now we can go back over here to find the sensor. And you can see we've got a bug happening in our guide. That's to be expected. The guide needs some work. It's pointing the correct way, but it's really overloaded for some reason. I'm not sure how it got wedged like that, but whatever. Now it should say objective X found. Huh, I can't even click on it. So this is active. Oh, see that? It should still say something, but this is now active. Okay, so we've got to actually disable the old ones, of course. So when we finish this, there we are, we're going to want to turn it off. There we are. That should make sense. Also, let's go ahead and fix it, because this is obviously wrong. We no longer have to do it that way. We can just turn it off via enabled equals false, like so. So that'll just mean that you can only click on it once. There's no particular reason to require that, but in this case it makes sense, you know. One more time. Yeah, there's definitely some bugs in the highlighter guide there. Yep. Now do the mission. Now complete the mission. Now go and see if it says objective X. Oh, look, it's kind of wedged in highlighted position. I have to think about that. There, see, good. So the problem with it is that when we disable it, it no longer does the update. So what we need to do is when we do that on disable, we're going to want to actually have it turn off the visual. So here you can see our visual happening here. There it is. So basically we're just going to want to set the glow counter equal to 0 and do this. But we're going to have to do it within our on disable, which is unfortunately private. So we'll just go ahead and protected override on disable. There we are. Perfect. So now it'll just vanish the instant that we turn this off, and we won't have that kind of semi-permanent glow. let's go ahead and test it. Otto says, hi, are you planning a game before the development begins? Working directly on the project? No, we're kind of just developing as we go. David Goder says he likes UML diagrams. Yeah, if those were easier to make in Unity, I'd have a much easier time. But in this case, I'm not worried too much about it. We're going to go ahead and just kind of goof on through. It's not a very large game, and there are no complicated, like, forking missions or anything. So, whatever. There, see, it vanishes. So, to answer Otto's question, I am just working straight through. But if you are trying to actually finish a game, you should obviously do development beforehand, you know, prototyping and stuff. And I've done prototyping before. This is not my first diving rodeo. I've created at least 20 or 30 diving prototypes over the years, and they've all sucked. This is the first time I've bothered to get this far into trying to make one look good. Looking good is such a big part of the diving experience, so, you know. I don't know what that is. So just to remind you what's going on here, we're building a mission. The yellow ball here is our mission controller, and then these yellow lines along the top are our chapters, and they draw a line down to where our chapter is centered. And then each chapter has these tendrily yellow lines kind of drifting around to tell you what elements are involved in that chapter. So that should help us keep clear as to what's going on. The only problem is that we do have a couple of elements that are technically in a chapter, but they're only there to say that they're not. Like this over here. This is part of chapter 1 because it has to be able to say that it's not ready, which is obviously not ideal. We don't have any way to distinguish between objectives that are useful and objectives that are just throwaway. I suppose I could like add a flag or something. Should we add a flag? That might be worthwhile. Yeah, let's go ahead and add just a really, really basic public bool minor. There. And what we'll do is when we're drawing the missions, or drawing the chapters rather, we're going to skip anything that is not, that is a minor objective. So if objectives a dot minor, and continue. And that should allow us just to get a cleaner representation, and it might also be useful later when we need to do some heuristics. Like I can just not include minor objects in the mission progression, stuff like that, but we'll do it later. So now you're going to see this yellow line should vanish when I say minor. See, it's gone. That way we won't have that set up where it thinks that it's part of the same thing. Now the only other question is whether we actually want to do it like this, because it might make more sense for us to have the same sort of webbing where it's above, since this is actually quite hard to see. Let's go ahead and just leave it like this for now. We can change it later. All right. So now that we've got this sort of working, we have to start to think about the actual progression of the mission. And obviously you have to get to a certain point before you can program the mission. But we still don't have things like animations for the NPCs and stuff like that. But we do have the basic functionality of being able to click on stuff and stacking stuff in specific arrangements. So that means that we can start to consider what this mission should be about. And what that means is I'm just going to go ahead and write some dialogue sequences for these components. But first I want to switch out these components because, as you can see, they are boxes. And what they really need to be is a sci-a kit. So we're going to take this sci-a kit and we're going to make it a prefab, and we're going to reuse it like hundreds of times. Now that the sci-a kit is not permanently bound to a mission objective, we don't have to worry about whether or not we're changing it every time we click on it. What does this arrow mean? Oh, of course. That's I don't care. I don't want that. There we are. So we can just drop the Psi-A kit anywhere we want it, say right there, and then arrange it more properly so that it looks good. We don't need this box anymore. You can see this objective cube. That's why we had a cube in the other one. It was just left over. So we're going to delete that. And this is going to instead point at this new Psi-A object, which I think is just floating free. There it is. So we're going to go ahead and put this in room 1 as well. I guess we should go ahead and just rename it so that they have different names. It doesn't really matter that much. But for the sake of, clicking in the hierarchy, we're going to want to make sure that they're not too confusing. So this guy, we're going to just set them up in a way that looks okay. And that means that we're going to want to have a little bit more control over the exact rotation and stuff. One of the things about this is that there's no cable running to it, which is wrong. There should be a cable running to it. Another thing that's wrong with it is that it's offset. That's interesting. I didn't think that this was offset that much. For some reason, it's anchored around one of the legs. That's weird. I should probably fix that now if I'm going to fix it ever. Yeah, you can see how it's not in the center at all. That's the center. Yeah, see? Well, unfortunately, that means we've got to drag all this shit around too. That's fine. It's better to redo it once than redo it 500 times. The cinder blocks need work. And I know it might seem a little strange to put cinder blocks on these things, but that's actually how they do it in the real world. Who am I to scoff? The other thing we're going to need to do is this capsule is in the wrong spot. There we are. So now we should be able to tell these guys to revert if they aren't already. I think we need to tell them to revert. How do we tell them to revert? This used to be easy. We'll just delete them and drag it back into the scene because fuck you. All right, so, oh, you know what the problem was? I just forgot to save it. That's right. So let's go ahead and mark this as saved. There, that's fine now. No problems. So the issue with this is, you can see that we've got one of these capsules, I guess. What is this, a Psi pot? It was invisible. I didn't even know it existed. We're going to need to move it so that it is in a spot that's vaguely reasonable. I don't remember how I had it, but I guess that's probably okay. And once again, we'll save this change. Just boom. Head back over to one of these other guys and start to put them in the right spot. So as I was saying, there's no cable running to this one. He's just kind of standing out here on his own, which makes him really hard to find, which may or may not be good. Either way, we've got some cinder blocks that need to be arranged like this. But without a cable running to it, there's no clear way to find it aside from your HUD guide. I might have to change that later. Here's Psi B. Psi B is near this box, which is also an objective cube. Get rid of that. And we'll just bring that down into here. And the thing about this is that we've got this kind of bound cable happening, which doesn't really fit into our setup in terms of how it hooks into things. We don't really have the ability to hook that through our object. So if we wanted to, what we could do is have it fork and then have one piece of it go in and one piece of it go past. If we take a look, this is the handle. And if we drag the stop out, it'll recalculate everything nice and easy. And you can see that what we've got here is a converter where it changes from this kind of fat cable over to this kind of thin cable. And what we would really like to have is that converter twice so that it will do both. Let's go ahead and see how easy that is. If we grab this rope B here, we can duplicate rope B. And it doesn't look like it's too complicated, so we'll go ahead and do exactly that. And then what we can do with the second rope B is plug it into our buddy here. We've got a handle. We don't need a handle, so we're going to go ahead and delete that handle. Boom. Up here, you can see that we've now got a missing transform. We just go ahead and delete that array element. And then we can grab this rope stop. It's definitely not going to be over there. I'm going to want to bring it all the way back here. Oh, that's a little bit too far. There. And where should we put this guy? We want to plug it into this. Where should this be? It should be somewhere that's a little bit hard to see. We're going to go ahead and just stick it maybe in here somewhere. I should probably come up with some code that just auto drops these to the ground. I'll do that later. Oh, you can see how what we've got here is that the two ropes have the same mesh, which is causing us issues. So we're going to go ahead and desync it. And basically that means that this guy, rope B, needs to be regenerated. Quick gen. There we are. I forgot that just randomly duplicating ropes will have some errors because they use the same mesh twice. That's something that if I were ever going to release this, I'd have to fix. So we'll just plug this in. You know, it would make more sense if this was rotated another 120 degrees. You whoop. Boy, if I had some kind of cable snapping, that would be great. Like I could create conduits for these cables to automatically connect to if I wasn't so incompetent. Maybe I'll think about that later. Let's change that to local. David Goder says, how do the ropes work? Do they have bones? Nope. These are particle ropes. They generate a custom mesh. So what ends up happening is that each of these meshes is generated out of a particle system. In fact, if I were to select a specific rope, you can see the particles. Bloop, shbloop, 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 shbloop. So whenever a handle in the rope gets moved, all of the particles get recalculated. And that's just a matter of drawing particles between each of the handles and then letting them kind of fall with gravity. It's pretty basic stuff. In terms of rope physics. It's not nearly as complicated as some of the others out there. I was going to use Obi ropes, but it turns out that they don't have this functionality for non-real-time ropes. They only have this functionality for real-time ropes, which was silly because these aren't real-time. That once the scene starts, these are set in place. These meshes are never recalculated in real time. But it gives me the ability to use a lot of ropes. Like if you used Obi ropes, you'd be stuck with maybe 10 or 20 ropes before you started to overload it. But in this case, I can have thousands because they're all just static meshes. But it does mean that I have to worry a little bit about some of these. You can see this circle here. That circle is actually an error warning. If we were to select rope B, you can see how there's this giant red ball. What that's telling me is that the handles that I've selected are not in good spots to actually go around that. So it's got a collision here. But our handle is right there, as you can see. If we grab that handle, we can simply drag it up on top of the rock, and it will stop being a giant error sign. Did I drag it too far? There we are. See? And it will conform to the surfaces, and it will do all the stuff that you want it to do. It's pretty nice. There we are. So that's a nice cheap way to do it. The only flaw I've got is that right now both of these ropes are coming out of the same conduit, which is a little bit strange. It's not how I would generally like to see that happen. Let's go ahead and lock this stop, and then we can move the entire rope down like this. And then we can go up here to this guy, and this has an end visual. Here's the visual for the end object. If we just scale that up to 2, we can just really, really basically force this setup. So with that in mind, we're going to grab these, the handle and the stop both locked. We can move both of these ropes up at the same time, like this. There we are. I mean, it's not very pretty, but it's far less ugly than having them literally overlap. And I can come up with a custom cable for it later if I want. The only issue I've got with this is that it's really a stiff rope. You can see how it's really coming out quite far. And that's because the extension here is really, really long. We think we're going to go ahead and move that extension in quite a bit. It's just too far from the front there. I think that's going to work. The extensions normally aren't recalculated, but you can see how there's a reason the extensions are generally like that. Let's go ahead and unmove the extension, I guess. I'll have to think about that. There's got to be a way to make that a little bit less hokey. I'll figure it out later. Yeah, if you wanted to see the development of that, you can, because I did it all, literally every bit of it on stream, but it was like 30 streams, so it would be quite a binge watch. So I think that that's great. I like how this rope weaves through like that. That's really cute. Up here, we've got this thing, which I thought I locked, but clearly I didn't because it's not in the right place anymore. It is locked. It's just not. Interesting. I wonder what I did to knock that off course. It doesn't matter. All right, so that is our setup. And what we can do is we can simply go into our missions and set those up as targets. So here we've got objective 2 and objective 3. Those are simply going to point to B. And C. Why did that not work? Sorry, there's something a little screwy going on here. Oh, it did work. This is something else entirely. Never mind. David Gutter says he's learning a lot. Well, that's good. I'm not a professional developer, so don't consider any of this to be like production ready work. But if you're a hobbyist or just starting, I think that a lot of this could be useful to you. Dr. Argus says, how's it going over here? Well, I just finished implementing some mission stuff, so pretty good. What we're going to do now is duplicate these 2 missions and drag them up into the intro. And the only reason we're doing that is so that we can mark them as minor and have them simply complain that they're not active. So we're going to go ahead and replace this with a nice sensor rig, but unpowered. All right, so you can see that I've got some errors happening here. The variable target, a highlightable target. So the target is a mesh renderer. Oh, for some reason I didn't, hold on. So I've got this set up where I auto-generate. Let's just call this auto-populate rather than auto-populate collider. We need the collider, but we also need the mesh. And we're just gonna do the same thing. So mesh renderer targ equals, that goes in here. Mesh renderer targ equals o.realworldtarget.getComponent mesh renderer. If not targ, we'll call this MR. If not MR, then we're going to want to fetch it from its kids. MR equals o.realworldtarget.getComponent in children. Mesh renderer. And then we say target equals MR. Unfortunately, we stupidly put a whole bunch of work up here. So we're going to go ahead and rename these variables. There we are. All this does is it now finds both of the things automatically instead of just one. So we'll go ahead and scroll that a little bit until it finishes recompiling. So over here, we're going to see whether or not... See, I was right when I looked at this and said it didn't work, but obviously I hadn't programmed it to work. There it is, Capsule Mesh Renderer. And if I come down here to the other one, auto-populate, auto-populate, auto-populate. There we are. Now we've only got the problems with the old buddy system, because that buddy system needs some work. So over here we've got the object we've added. It looks a little bit like a spider at this range. And this should just say that it's offline. It didn't say anything. Oh, I forgot to... My bad. We need to add it to the objectives. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it. It might be better... it doesn't matter. I'll do it later if it needs to be done. So let's go try that out now, and it should work out fine. Of course, you need to add it to the other mystery as well. So... click. And there we say, it's got a nice sensor rig, but unpowered. Now we do have the same setup here, but that one's already got it running correctly, so I shouldn't have even bothered to stop it. I don't need to add it on that mission. They're already ready. So we're going to go down here, we're going to power things up, and we're going to make sure that the power up works. We're going to have to fix this visual for the chatter because it's really ugly. We'll figure it out. I have to think about what I want it to look like. If you've got a really cool idea for how you want that chatter to look, let me know. So now the buddy should fly over, charge it. Okay, it's online. The connected sensors should now be online. Go find them, and one of those connected sensors should be right over here. It should say Objective X found, I believe. There we are. Works fine. So now we've got these objectives set up so that they will, they'll be a little bit more, how do you say it? a little more flexible. We'll be able to do a lot more with them without having to worry too much about whether or not they are set up properly, because it's okay if they're not set up properly. But I want to change the drawing method. We've got some drawing errors here and there. We're not drawing very well. We're going to go over into the chapter on Draw GUI, and we're going to fix this up a little bit so that we get a real good sense of where these things are instead of being confused. So to do that, we're going to want to make sure that we get a general average position. We just say average plus equals objectives dot position, and then we say average divided by equals objectives. Oh, except for if they're minor objectives, that's not going to work, is it? I guess it's fine, because we're only using it for a baseline. Actually, what we want is the highest position. Why? 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 Yeah, why? And then we're just going to add, say, 5 meters to top. And that will allow us to draw like a lace line above all of these objects. So here's what we've got. We've got this position situation where we're drawing from point to point. And all we really need to do is make sure to keep overriding the Y value so that we never end up with a something that dips down into the rock. So the first line we're going to draw is from position to that lace element. So there we are, like that. And then from here, what we do is we draw. We're going to get the positions. Vector 3 pp equals objectives a dot position. Vector 3 px equals pp px dot y equals top. And then we say draw line pos pp, and then we say draw line pp px, and then we say pos equals px. And that should create like a bunch of lasers that point down. There. That's how we want it to be. Except for it's not working. It's drawing to the baseline and then drawing up, and that's not how we want it. So this is px. There we are. That'll fix it. There. So what that does is it simply draws in a way that will hopefully be a little bit easier to see. Now that it's extending up from a baseline, it should be a lot easier for us to tell where these things are rather than constantly cutting through rocks. The last step is to make a static value. Set that to 10, and then we'll switch this from 5 to UI float. And that should push them another 5 meters up. There we are. And that'll get it even over these high rocks. That should make it easy for us to see. Yeah. See, now we can see that this is actually 2 different objects, not just one. Of course, the small objects are not being properly drawn, but that's because they're not supposed to be. This actually does involve all these objects, but these objects, I'll just say that they're unpowered, so we're not saying that they're part of the setup. My voice is going. Don't know if you can hear that. So we're coming up on the end. If you guys have anything you want to say or ask, now would be a good time to do it. I guess I'll go ahead and do some writing. Just write these objectives, the actual text that we might want. And then after that, I will log off. So the first thing we find is going to be they're monitoring cave system beneath here. And then we can just copy and paste. What did they find? Looks like it's been growing due to water flow. Right, and then the second one we can find will tell us a little bit more about that. So let's say the cave system seems to be a concern to them. Is it captain or is it support? I actually don't remember. Captain, yeah. Do you see any signs of collapse? Not here. It's all intact. Find the last. Find everything you can before moving on. Moving into potential danger. Potential. Yeah, that's how I want to say it. And then over here, we're going to go ahead and say, yeah, the last data point shows people swimming over into the next room. Be careful, but go find out what's up. There we are. And now those pieces of dialogue should be said whenever we need to have them be said. I can go ahead and just disable the first mission here for now. And that's going to just let us get straight into that part so we can test it. And later on, I'll have to come up with a way to kind of front load that stuff so that I don't have to constantly specify it as now existing or now not existing. So even though those are written on top of the events themselves, they're not actually tied to them. I can discover these in any order and they will say the same thing in the same order, which is nice. They're monitoring the cave system beneath here. It stopped. So that means that it's not properly populated. If we take a look at the scene, mission scene, you can see how it's got one thing here. We're going to want to set that up to be 0. They should auto-populate. Let's find out. Might as well go ahead and see whether or not that order system still works. It should. Oh, look at how off that handle is. I'll have to tweak it, move it so that it's a little bit less forced. It's fine. They're monitoring the cave system beneath here. What did they find? Looks like it's been growing due to erosive water flow. So everything seems to be working as I want it to. I don't think there's any reason to keep going there. I know that that part works. Let's go ahead and add the intro back into the mission guide here. Rename this mystery to Sensors. I don't think we need room 1. We're just going to go ahead and leave it, just delete it. Call this a room 1 sensors. So that should work fine. Everything should work. Everything seems fine. I think that the next time you see me, I'll be trying to figure out what to do about that dialogue system, because that there's a couple of flaws with it, and the biggest one is that it looks bad. So that's what we'll be trying to fix up next time, I think. That'll happen on Wednesday. So I'll see you then, and thanks for keeping me company for a little while, and I'll be seeing you. Have a good one.